Hi everyone, today we're going to be going over sheet layout. So this is going to involve how we duplicate our sheets, that's how we copy our sheets and how we update our title blocks. It's also going to involve how we update our viewports and reframe them in the best way. It'll involve some tricks around how we set up our detail views, which we haven't really gone into yet. And it's also going to go over how to plot and how to print, and the difference between plotting and printing. What I'd like to start with is just changing the way that our sheet is currently looking. So by default this has a white background, and that's because it's meant to represent a piece of paper, and this is a really obvious representation of that. But what it does mean is that when we're looking at it, our yellow lines are really difficult to see, and it gets a bit garish. So what we're going to do is just change that background colour of our sheet. So we're going to go up to our big A and down to Options. This brings up this dialog again, and in the Display tab, that's the second tab along, we're going to come down into the around this quadrant into Colours, and then within the context of Sheet Layout, in here, Uniform Background, we're just going to change this one thing in here, which is the colour. I'm going to make this the 33, 40, 48 grey colour down the bottom, and you can see that's a better preview of what we're going to be working with. So if we apply and close, and then OK, you can see that's updated that colour, that background of the sheet, and you can actually start seeing those yellows, and that makes it much easier to see all of our drawing elements. What you'll notice as well is that I've finished dimensioning this drawing, and I've finished annotating it, all these annotations that you see on your original hand drawing. These elements are just drawn using circles, which we went through in the first module, and lines. So this is, and of course text. So this is just a little set that you can make with the tools that you currently have. It's nice if you make sure that you've got all your circles, they're all the same, and that your angles on these are 45s. Everything is very similar sized and shaped. What I did do was create myself a text 3 layer because I wanted these lines to be a little bit thicker. And I also created a text 3A layer so that I could get these dashed lines in. I also added the dashed 2 type to that layer. So the A is representative of the special line type, and instead of just adding the standard dash that's on the hidden layer, which is being used for the roof line, I put on dash 2 so that it was a slightly different sized dash. That's so it's a little bit closer to that original hand drawing. Now that we've caught up on those changes, we're going to duplicate this sheet, and then we're going to reframe it for our section drawing. So down the bottom at the moment, we've got Layout 1, which is the one that we've been working with. It's the one that we've drawn our title block in and everything. Layout 2, when we flip to that, this is one of the original default views that we started with. So we're going to delete this one because we don't need this view. So if you right-click on Layout 2, make sure it's not Layout 1, and go up to Delete, and then OK, that will delete that second tab down the bottom and that second sheet. We're now going to rename our Layout 1. So if we right click on Layout 1 and go up to Rename, that will then highlight that blue so we can type in it. So I'm going to name this O1 Plan. This is because it is sheet number 1 and it's got our plan in it. It's really important to name your tabs so you've got ease of navigation. This is a good habit to get into because when you're in practice, sometimes you get upwards of 50 sheets and more than that, so it gets a little bit unwieldy if they're all named Layout 1, Layout 2, Layout 3. We're now going to duplicate this sheet. So if we right click on this again and we go to Move or Copy this time, this brings up another little dialog. So we're going to check the Create a Copy option down the bottom, and then we're going to highlight Move to End. When you've got a big list of sheets in here, the Move to End is the easiest way to know where you're creating your copy. And you can see now we've got a Plan 01, which is our original, and now we've got a 01 Plan 2 between these two sheets. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to rename this 02 because it's sheet number 2, and Section, because it will have our section on it. This is then going to evolve as renaming parts of the title block. the only thing we need to change. So this is the benefit of having duplicated that first sheet. We don't have to redraw, we don't have to retype all of this stuff. Now, we need to reframe our viewport, but we also need to get rid of all these annotations now that they're not applicable. So I'm going to select everything that's here, but I'm going to hold shift and then click on that viewport to deselect part of that selection. So when you've selected a heap of stuff, if you want to remove something from that, it's a hold shift and then click on it, and it will remove that item that you're selecting with the shift click. We can then hit erase, and that clears all of those annotations off. I now want to reframe this viewport so that it's showing our section rather than the plan. Now, the neatest way to do this is going to be to select this, pull this up to the point where we can see that, and then pull this up to reframe it with it out, and then to just move that viewport down to where we want that section to sit. This is ensuring that it's sitting in the same place north-south as our plan, but also it means that it's definitely still to scale and we're not messing around with that. The other option that you have to do this, I'm going to undo that, is to activate the viewport by double-clicking within it. You now know that that's activated because that's a thick line and it says model here, so you know that you've got your model space activated. This is locked to make sure that we weren't accidentally scrolling within that model space and descaling. If I unlock that, we now have the option to move around in here, so we can bring that down to where we want that to sit. Double check that we haven't accidentally scrolled, so we're definitely still at 1 to 100. We can then click the lock again, and then deactivate the viewport by double clicking, and then of course also bring that up to reframe the viewport how we want that to sit. So they're two very similar ways. It's just that the first way has slightly less risk of accidentally moving your drawing out of scale. Now that we've got our section there, we want to annotate it. And we can go from scratch like we did with the plan. We've got all of the tools to be able to do that. We've got our text tools and everything in our Annotate tab. However, there are a few things back on this sheet that we want to be matching. So I'm going to select some of the things that I want to match, like the detail call out, my title here, my room name, also my door and window names here. They're the ones I kind of want to match particularly. And then instead of using the copy tool, AutoCAD's copy tool here, I'm going to press Control C on my keyboard. So that copies to the clipboard like usual, and then that means that when we come into our section we can hit Control V, and that will paste those items onto this page, and then we can move these around, rearrange them as we see fit. What this does is gives us consistency between the sheets and saves us a little bit of time in redrawing stuff like the detail call out, because that's a little bit more difficult, and making sure that they're all the same across each page is one of those consistency things in AutoCAD that's very important. If you have one detail that's repeated across many pages, you want to make sure it's appearing the same on all of your pages. So I've gone through and I've compared to the original hand-drawn sketch, just making sure I'm getting that detail call out, I'm getting these dimensions in here. I'm just noting that there's a couple things that I have missed. I've missed this FFL text that I need to add in, and this angle over here, and also this additional hatch down the bottom. So we're going to go through those three things. The most easiest one is going to be that FFL text. So I'm just going to copy that down here. I want to make sure it's in line with those, so I'm going to grab it from there. And we'll go FFL. Right to there, nice and neat. The other thing that's missing, so the hatch that's coming down and around the bottom. So with the hatch, we're going to switch back to model space because the hatch is going model space. Now, because it's sitting under the slab, it's not an enclosed space, so we have to create some lines here that are just temporary that we're going to use to create a boundary for that hatch, and then we'll delete them afterwards. The earth hatch is in here somewhere. There it is. It's clearly not the right scale. And we want that to be sitting at a 45-degree angle, just like the drawing. Maybe it should be a bit more. 50. I'm going to hit enter to end that. I'm going to delete those boundary lines because we don't need them. I'm going to make sure that I'm not leaving my hatch on my dim 1 layer. That needs to be going onto my hatch layer. The hand-drawn version of this has a bit of a kooky boundary around it. So again, you can remember that you can grab these lines and move them around a bit. You're also able to hover over here and you can add some extra vertexes. And the vertex means the control point, so that you can add in that little bit of flavour here and there if that's what you want to start doing with those hatches. Going to switch back into Paperspace so we can see that we've got our hatches and stuff coming together there. The last thing that we're missing is that angle dimension up here. So if we look at the original drawing on here, you can see we've got these two lines, we've got our angle dimension between them. When we come to do that on our screen here, we're going to be using the angular dimension, so under the Annotate tab. This usually says linear. If you use the drop down, you'll have the option for angular. So the way that the angular dimension works is that we select two arcs or lines. So we're going to select the two lines that we want to measure between. So if we start off by selecting the first line and then selecting that second line, you'll see that you're given a angular dimension between them. The issue is that we want this to sit up and away from the roof. We don't want it to sit there and interact with it. If we move that away, it doesn't have any reference lines on it. It's a little bit lost without any guiding lines. So what we're going to do is create some guiding lines for it, and then we're going to dimension it. So we're going to erase that, and we are going to switch to our dim 1 layer because there's going to be a dimension. We use the line tool to draw a line approximately where you want this to sit above the roof, say 8 mil, and then we're going to come back and we're going to use that, we're going to turn off ortho so we can grab an approximate dimension here. Now we know that this is 25 degrees between them. We know obviously that this is sitting at 180, so we want to come 25 back from there. So I'm going to hit the tab, I'm going to type in 155, which is the 25 back from 180, hit enter, and you can see that that is a parallel line with this, and then we can add a dimension between them. The other way that we could do that to make sure that we're being really accurate with that dimension is to actually draw a line that is matching upon that roof, and then we can move that line out to here. That's going to help if we don't actually know the angle at which our roof is sitting. We will have to create a line that will match. And then we can come back to our Annotate tab and our angular dimension, and we can pop that bad boy in here. And when we do a dimension, if this isn't quite sitting where you want it to do, there's a control point on it. We can drag that in and around to make sure that we're getting that to sit aesthetically where we want it to. There we go. Nice and neat. Now, for our last two sheets, what we're going to do, obviously we're going to right click, we're going to move all copy, we want to move to the end, we want to create a copy. This one is going to be 03. Oh. Rename 03 land details. In here, we're going to delete those annotations. We can rename this. And of course we can do the same again for our section detail. So we've got all of our pages all waiting. Oh. we just need to make sure that we have our plan details to add to these sheets. So we've got our plan, we've got our section. You've got all the tools that you need to draw your plan details and your section detail. But there's just a couple of things that we want to go through to make sure that you're understanding the scale of this still as you move into your plan details. So you're drawing at 1:1 when you're in model space. These are life-size drawings, remember? It's the paper space when we switch over to this view where we're making that smaller, we're fitting it to a page, we're scaling it down to 1:100. When we're in model space, everything's 1:1, so when you come to draw your plan details, they will appear the same size in model space. It's when we move them into paper space that we scale them to a different scale and give them that different level of detail. To make that clear, what we're going to do, to start your plan details, you're going to come into the areas of your plan that you know you're using to do your plan details, so through these sections, right? These are the bits that you're pulling out to do your details. I'm going to copy these parts. I'm going to put ortho back on so this is nice and neat. Pull these away from there, and then I'm going to trim down to approximately where I want to see the edge of my details. That looks about right. I can leave these separately, or I can move them closer together. I'm going to leave them where they are for now. I'm going to do the same thing with this part of my section. Pull this across. I'm going to come in with the line tool and just trim this down. So I now have the base for each of my details here. So obviously I'm going to need to start drawing in each individual brick. So again, I can just start to use the offset tool to do that. You know that a brick is 230 by 110, which means that all of this should meet nice and neat. You're going to be able to get rid of those lines because you're going to just be drawing your bricks and then all of the mortar in there instead. So you'll be able to start doing this type of thing where you're copying a brick over. And adding all of that additional detail that's on your plan details, your hand-drawn ones. But what this allows you to do is it's that good starting point, and it gives you a really good guide as to where to start. What I'm also going to do is, now that we've pulled these out, is just show you how to set them up on your sheets, even though they're lacking that detail for now. So we're going to switch to our plan details sheet. We're going to activate this viewport. We're going to unlock the viewport so that we can scroll out and we can come down. We're going to find our first plan detail. We're going to zoom in. And then obviously we need to make sure that we are putting a scale on this. So while this is showing a decimal point at the moment, we actually want to use the scale. We want to specify 1:10. It's immediately going to scale to 1:10. We're going to lock it again, so we're not going to accidentally scroll and undo that. I'm going to double click to deactivate my viewport. And then I'm just going to use the control points to drag this around, just get that to sit where I want it to sit. I can move the viewport on the screen. I can move that text. Let's see, plan detail 1. It's no longer 1:100, this is 1:10. This is the nice thing about CAD, is that once you've got your set out there, you can make sure that you're placing everything very nicely on the page and that you're aligning things. You can also use the convenience of being able to copy a viewport over, which allows us to then activate our new one, unlock it again, and we're going to scroll over, zoom out, reframe back into here, make sure I'm rescaling to 1:10. I'm going to lock that viewport and I'm going to deactivate it. Now this isn't quite sitting where I want it to, so I'm going to use the move tool. You can snap to things within model space from paper space. So to make sure that I'm lining these up right, it's going to nice and neatly, so that all of these lines eventually will, like on the hand drawing one, meet up nice and neat. And of course, as you come in and do the detail for these, you might want to reframe these again, but this gives you that first starting point from where to begin this layout. And of course, we can do the same thing for the section detail. So we're going to switch to our section detail. I'm going to move this out of the way for now, and I'm going to make our viewport much bigger. So when we activate this, we're going to have to unlock it, and again, we'll have to zoom and reframe. Now, when we come back to this and we go to rescale, I'm going to make this 1 to 10, this is going to zoom in, and it looks as though this doesn't fit. Now, you'll remember on your hand drawing one, you had a break line through your window. So that's because at this scale, this window is really big, but it's showing the same thing, and it's a very boring just piece of glass for this huge amount of space. So what we're going to do, we're going to move this up so it's sitting nice and neat there. We're going to deactivate that viewport, come back in, select that viewport, and we're going to drag that down so that we're seeing some of that glass, but not a heap of the glass. And then we're going to copy that viewport up, nudge it up a bit so there's a little bit of a break. Bring that down, and then once we're back in here, if we hold Shift while we move this down, we'll be able to bring that down and reframe that nice and neat. So it looks like it's in the same position, but we're cutting out a heap of that window. We can reframe this so we're sitting exactly where we want that to sit. So that's how we get that section detail to fit on that page. It looks as though it's one viewport, but it's actually two just aligned on top of each other. You'll now be able to fill out the rest of the detail for all of these in model space, and then come into paper space and annotate them using multi-leaders, making sure you're lining them up in nice columns, everything setting out everything nice and neat. But you've got all of those tools to be able to do that now. You have all of those skills. What I do want to run you through, the very last thing, is how to plot and how to print, and the difference between those two. So plotting is the creation of a PDF file from your AutoCAD file that is then, it's a PDF and you've got it on your computer. That's the plotting process. That creates goes through the process of making all of the colours, it makes them into line weights, and it creates a file for you that is then saved. That file can then get emailed to a client, it can then get used in presentations, you can put it into InDesign and lay them out on pages. That's the PDF file that you are going to upload to MyUni to submit your assignment. Printing is the actual physical printing through of the PDF file through a physical paper and ink printer and creating a hard copy version. Plotting is creating that digital soft copy version. So to plot, what we do, we come down to the sheet that we want to plot, we right click and we go to plot. This brings up a dialog about batch plotting. So batch plotting lets you plot more than one sheet at once. What we're going to do is just continue to plot a single sheet for now. Batch plotting can get a little bit complicated, and because we've only got 4 sheets, we're just going to stick with continuing to plot a single sheet. I'm not going to bother showing this again. This then brings up this dialog again. This should look very familiar from when we filled out all of this and when we put in our CTB file. If you have a little warning sign here, it means that your computer can now no longer find that CTB file. So if you've moved computers since you set that up, if you've gone home, if you saved that file on a USB and now the USB is not in the computer, it means that the computer AutoCAD can now not find that file. So what you need to do is relink it. If you can't remember how to relink it, pop back to that module and just watch that again, follow along there. But it's very important that this is showing up correctly, because otherwise what you're going to get is just lots of coloured lines as opposed to black and white and line thicknesses. So once you've checked that that's all in place, you can just hit OK. It's going to ask you where you want to save it and what you want to name it. Make sure you check MyUni for naming conventions for files that you're uploading to MyUni. I'm not sure what that's going to be, so I'm not going to tell you what that is. Make sure you check those instructions. You can just hit save, and then that is going to give you your PDF. Make sure that you check this PDF, so when you zoom in on this, you're going to be able to really look at those line weights. You can see that the outer edge of the wall is thicker than the inner wall lines. If you want to change any of these line weights, you just have to alter the layer properties of those layers or change the layers that those lines are on. We'll quickly go through that, but it's really important that you come through and you scan this. Make sure you're happy with the way everything's placed. So like I want to tweak some of these text placements. I could probably beef up those walls a bit thicker to make sure that it's really different from what's not cut. It's that personal preference, and it's the way that you want your drawing to appear, so just make sure that you're reviewing your drawing. It's also going to look different again when it's printed physically, so if you can and if you want to, I would recommend printing a physical copy to review as well. So to change up some of these line weights, I'm going to pop into model space. I'm going to remember that my outside wall line is on wall 3. I'm going to double check what else I put on wall 3. So it looks like most of my section I put on detail 3 rather than wall 3, which means that if I change wall 3, it should only be affecting these lines. The way that I can double check that is to make wall 3 my current layer, and then I can turn off all other layers. So this is going to give me a really clear indication of what I've left on that layer, to make sure that I'm only affecting lines that I want to affect. I can select these lines and move them to a whole new layer if I wanted. So I might create a wall 4. I'm going to change this up to 4. I'm going to select these lines because I'm not sure about my detail ones yet. I'm going to assess those when I come to those specifically, but I know that for my plan I want these a little bit thicker. So I'm going to change all of these to a wall 4. They're now on a cyan layer, and I'm then going to turn on all my other layers again. And then I'm going to come to my plan. I'm going to go plot. And see how different this is. So that is thicker than it was before. I'm now thinking that probably I want to think about beefing up my window frame and my glass just to make sure that it looks different from that sill a bit more even. I'm going to come back to model space. I'm going to check what layer I put those on. It looks like it's a wall 2. So I'm going to change that to my current layer. I'm going to turn off everything but wall 2. And again, it looks like that's everything that I've got left on that layer. So I'm just going to select those. I'm going to bump them up to wall 3. Oh, you will get a warning because I'm moving those to a layer that I've turned off, just to make sure that you're aware of what you're doing with AutoCAD. I'm now going to turn all of those layers back on, so it doesn't really matter. Pop it to plan. Test. And look, I'm much happier with the way that that looks. So I'm seeing that there's a clear difference between this line and this line, so that this is much more definitely cut through than that sill which we're seeing in the background. So this level of experimentation is the kind of thing that you guys need to be doing with your plans and your sections to make sure that you're getting them to look how you want them to look. It's important to remember though that what you're seeing on your screen and what prints is very different. So this will be super important when you're doing presentation posters and that kind of thing. The test print is going to give you the genuine understanding of how your stuff looks. So when this is printed, it's probably about yay big on a piece of paper. I'm not seeing those line weights on this screen because the pixels don't really work that way. Printing it really is the only way that I'm going to know how that's going to look, and it can be super important. As an example, I've beefed up my window frames here because I think they look really good when I'm zooming in. However, if I printed this, I might not be able to see this difference. They might really meld together, and what I might need to be doing is actually putting that back down to that yellow line weight to be able to see that line work. The only way that I would know that is if I did a test print. And that's why it's important to know the difference between plotting and printing.